St. Matthew's smelled like lilies and coffee. I wore my army dress uniform because it was pressed and honest. Vanessa said it was a bit much, which is rich from someone who color codes emotions. Grandpa Samuel got the flag and the bugle. He earned both in 1945 and never bragged. People shook my hand and read the standard lines. I let the pastor finish on time, which may be his best miracle. An older neighbor pulled me into a hug and said Grandpa still shoveled her sidewalk in winters when his knees hated him. That sounded exactly like him. Do the job, then complain to nobody. Vanessa dabbed at a dry eye and made sure the photographer from the local paper caught it. We caravanned to Coleman and Price Attorneys, where the chairs are leather and the art looks like it bills by the hour. Mr. Price opened a thick folder and read slowly. Uncle Robert, the Lake House and 30% of Grant and Mason contractors. Vanessa, the Walnut Street home and its contents, excluding items separately bequeathed. Dylan, an investment account and a low-mileage sedan. Aunt Margaret, annuities and china nobody enjoys. Then, to my granddaughter, Major Evelyn Grant, he read, who understands duty without applause. I leave the brass key in my top desk drawer. He set an old brass key on the table. No tag, no note. The room did that thing where no one looks at you but everyone sees you. Mr. Price's wall clock ticked like it had an opinion. Vanessa laughed out loud. She gets a key, she said satisfied. Dylan leaned in. Maybe it opens a storage locker full of feelings. Aunt Margaret studied her nails. I picked up the key. Heavy, worn, unmarked. Mr. Price finished the list gifts to a veteran's post, a trade school scholarship, funeral costs paid, and closed the folder. In the hallway, Vanessa took my sleeve. She always touches you before saying something you won't like. Don't feel bad, she said. Grandpa knew the army covers your needs. You're set. I smiled because training works. Enjoy the house, I said. Outside, the lot had more puddles than cars. Wind pushed cold across the asphalt. April in Ohio can't pick a season. Dylan lit a cigarette he didn't need. What's the key for, Major? He asked. A shed? Please say shed. I put it in my pocket. If I find a shed, I'll put your name on it. I drove to the Walnut Street house. Grandpa's study was neat, ledgers stacked, pens aligned. The top drawer showed a square where the envelope had been. Sunday afternoons he'd sit here, pay bills in ink, and say, "Make your bed, then earn the bed." Vanessa walked in without knocking. "We're doing an inventory next week," she said, scanning like a realtor. "Don't start pocketing keepsakes. Also, wool wrinkles." He left me a key, I said. "I heard," she said. "Try the garage." I left before we started pretending. On the porch, the neighborhood kept moving mail, truck, dogs, 2 kids arguing about a skateboard. In my car, I weighed the key in my hand. Grandpa wasn't a prank man. He was a list man. If a key made the will, a lock mattered. I called Mr. Price. "Any instructions with the key?" "No," he said. "He brought the envelope 2 months ago. Asked me to keep it sealed, and said you'd know what to do." End of 12. Back at my apartment, I set the key on white paper, placed a ruler beside it, and took a photo. Document, then decide. I tried it on my own filing cabinet and the old toolbox under the sink to kill bad ideas. No fit, obviously. I searched, identify antique brass key. The internet supplied opinions. Some keys have numbers, mine didn't. Some belonged to cabinets, some to old post boxes. I checked for tiny stamps. Nothing. Coffee turned thoughts into bullet points. Grandpa kept records, trusted banks, and hated waste. A key in a will sounded like a place that honors paperwork. I looked up First Federal Trust Bank of Ohio. They close at 5. I grabbed my jacket. First Federal sits in a red brick building with a flag out front and carpet that tries to calm you. A gray-haired manager introduced himself as Daniel Brooks. A teller glanced at the key, and then at me like we were both antiques. I set the key on his desk. "I inherited this," I said. "No tag, no paperwork? Any idea what it belongs to?" He picked it up carefully. "Older style," he said. "We haven't issued keys like this in decades. May I check it under better light?" "I'll come with it," I said. He nodded to a side office, used a small magnifier, checked the head and the wording, and frowned at the lack of numbers. No stamp. That suggests a private lock, not standard. Some families kept custom compartments. Less common now, but still around. "Could it be here?" I asked. If it is, there will be a record, he said. He pulled a binder labeled Heritage Files, then another called Legacy Boxes, and traced a column of names. Your grandfather's full name? Samuel W. Grant. He flipped pages, paused, and unlocked a drawer with his own little brass key. He removed a folder and read an entry written in steady script. Private compartment established 1948 by Samuel W. Grant. Renewed annually. Access restricted to holder of the designated key and named heir. End quote. He looked up. We'll need proof of identity and estate documents. I handed him my ID and a letter from Mr. Price confirming the will. He checked both, called an internal extension, listened, and nodded. The account is active and in good standing, he said, placing the key back in my palm. He stood, straightened his tie out of habit, and held the door. If you're ready, he said, we can go downstairs and see whether your key still knows where it belongs. The elevator rattled as it carried us below the polished lobby, and I could feel the brass key warming in my hand from how tight I was holding it. The bank's basement smelled faintly of old paper and disinfectant. Mr. Brooks swiped his card, turned 2 locks, and led me down a corridor lined with metal doors. He stopped at one, checked the folder again, and said, Compartment 14, if the key fits, it's yours. I slid the brass key in, half expecting it not to work. It turned smoothly, like it had been waiting. The lock clicked, and Brooks stepped back. Take your time, he said, giving me a privacy I hadn't asked for but appreciated. Inside, the narrow box were sealed envelopes, bound certificates, and one thick leather-bound notebook with my grandfather's careful handwriting across the first page. Property, service, lessons. It smelled like the man himself, ink, tobacco, and discipline. There was also a smaller envelope with my name in his hand. I didn't open it there. Some things you do on your own. Carrying the folder out of the bank, I passed Vanessa's friend Ashley leaning against her car. She lowered her sunglasses and gave me a look like she knew something I didn't. Word travels fast in small towns. By the time I reached my car, my phone buzzed with a text from Dylan. Heard you found treasure? Drinks on you? At home, I set everything on my kitchen table. My apartment was tidy military habit, but suddenly the order felt fragile, like the documents could tilt the balance. I opened the notebook first. Grandpa had logged details of contracts, land parcels, investments in municipal bonds, and notes about men he'd served with. Every page was dated, signed, and precise. It wasn't wealth like gold bars, but it was value, disciplined, and steady. The envelope with my name contained a short letter. Evelyn, if you're reading this, the others already counted furniture and cars. You know better. Honor isn't on display, it's in the work. Use this key to guard what matters, not to flaunt it. The family won't understand at first, but you will. Grandpa. That line about the family won't understand burned hotter than coffee. Vanessa had spent her life performing understanding. She'd play the victim, the responsible one, the daughter who stayed close while I ran off to the army. I had the documents to prove otherwise now, but documents don't change people. By Sunday dinner at Aunt Margaret's, the whispers had spread. Margaret served ham like it was evidence, and Dylan opened with, So, Major, what did you pull out of that magic box? Cash? Gold? Vanessa gave him a look that said, Don't push too far, but her smirk said push a little more. It was paperwork, I said, chewing calmly. Contracts, investments, notes. Notes, Vanessa repeated, dabbing her mouth. Our grandfather gave you a diary. It's called documentation, I said. Not everyone lives on gossip. She set down her fork like she was laying down a weapon. You're not going to use this to claim more of the estate, are you? Because the will was clear. I smiled. I thought you said I got nothing. The table went quiet except for Margaret's clock. Dylan chuckled, then stopped when Vanessa shot him a glance. After dinner, as Coates went on, Vanessa cornered me in the hall. Look, she said softly, you've always had the army. You don't need this fight too. If you push, it'll make you look greedy. And you prefer I look what? I asked. Invisible? She straightened her scarf. Respectable. Walking to my car, I realized that respectable to her meant staying in the shadow while she posed in the light. The problem was, Grandpa hadn't written a life of shadows. He'd recorded every acre, every bond, every promise, and now it sat in my apartment, waiting to be understood. Monday morning, I carried the notebook to a veteran friend, Sergeant Allen, who ran a small financial consulting firm for service members. He whistled low as he flipped through the pages. Your grandfather wasn't just organized, he was strategic. These municipal bonds, rock solid for decades. These land parcels, they've doubled by now. This isn't scrap. This is a foundation. I asked him to verify the certificates, and he nodded. They're valid. You've got leverage here. Leverage. That word carried weight. Not just financial, but moral. Vanessa wanted optics. I had records. She wanted applause. I had proof. Back at the unit that week, during drills, I found myself rehearsing family arguments instead of commands. One of my soldiers, Private Harris, noticed my distraction. Everything okay, ma'am? He asked. Family paperwork, I said. He grinned. Worse than night patrol. Not wrong. By the next weekend, Vanessa had called a family meeting. Translation, her living room, her snacks, her script. She opened with a statement. It's come to my attention that certain private documents are being misinterpreted. For the sake of family unity, I think they should be handed over to a neutral party. Neutral meaning you, I said. Meaning a responsible adult, she shot back. Dylan raised a beer. I vote Aunt Margaret. Margaret nearly choked on her cookie. I pulled the brass key from my pocket, held it up, and let it glint in the light. Grandpa left this to me, along with the responsibility. If you want to see the papers, fine, we can sit down like grown-ups. But don't mistake your theater for authority. Vanessa's jaw tightened. You're making this into a battle. I slipped the key back in my pocket. Number, you did when you laughed. The room tilted, not literally, but socially. Dylan looked at the floor. Margaret fiddled with her rings. Vanessa held her smile too long, the way people do when they've lost the laugh but won't admit it. When I drove away, the night felt sharper, cleaner. My headlights caught the Walnut Street house as I passed, its windows dark, its lawn neat. It no longer looked like an inheritance. It looked like a stage where everyone wanted to play a role they hadn't earned. Back at my place, I laid the notebook on the table again. The ink on those pages was stronger than their chatter, and the key in my pocket was heavier than their laughter. I sat down, poured a drink, and started reading line by line. The way Grandpa had written it steady, exact, unflinching. The notebook was dense with numbers and neat cursive, but one entry caught me. First federal renewal secured. Dated just months before Grandpa passed. He'd been deliberate until the end, and he hadn't wasted a word. That single note felt like a breadcrumb he knew I would follow. The next morning I called Brooks at the bank. His tone was cautious, but he admitted there were restrictions. Only the key holder may access the box, and contents cannot be copied without your consent. He offered to schedule another appointment. I said I'd be there in an hour. Traffic was slow, as if the town itself wanted me to linger. I parked, walked through the red brick archway, and signed the ledger. Brooks guided me back to compartment 14, this time leaving me alone with a flat cart and a pair of white gloves. Inside the compartment, along with the notebook, I found bound folders stamped with state seals, bonds folded carefully, and a sealed letter addressed to executor. It felt like a second will hidden in plain sight. I brought the papers to my apartment and spread them across the table, photographing each page for backup. My training told me to always make a copy before anyone else touched evidence. As I scanned the papers, one stood out. A deed for a parcel of land outside town, near the county line, purchased in 1970, one under a trust. Grandpa had never mentioned it, not once during his porch stories or holiday dinners. By late afternoon, curiosity outweighed hesitation. I drove toward the address. The land was a stretch of open field bordered by maples, with a rusted gate and a no trespassing sign that had been weathered into near invisibility. The padlock was gone, but the hinge bore marks like it had been used not long ago. I walked the perimeter, boots sinking into soft soil, birds scattered at my steps, and wind carried the smell of cut grass. Halfway along the north side, I found a cement foundation, cracked but solid, as if a small structure had once stood there. On the foundation edge lay a corroded metal box, empty now, but once it had held something. Standing in that field, I realized this was more than inheritance. It was continuity. Grandpa hadn't cared about antiques or bragging rights, he'd cared about security, the kind built quietly and kept steady. Vanessa would never understand land and bonds. She wanted houses with chandeliers and photographs on glossy pages. This land was different. It wasn't glamorous, but it was resilient. I returned home to find 3 missed calls from Vanessa and 1 from Dylan. The voicemail was pure theater. Evelyn, people are asking questions. If you're sitting on property deeds, you should bring them forward for review. Review. That word meant hand them over so I can decide. Instead, I called Sergeant Allen again. We met at his office, where he studied the deed. This is clean, he said. Taxes paid through last year. Whoever inherits this holds a valuable asset. Inder. Could my family contest it? I asked. Only if the will didn't address it, he said. But your grandfather placed it under a trust, renewed continuously. That's strong legal ground. Allen leaned back. Look, Evelyn, this isn't just money. It's legacy. He left you the key because he knew you'd protect it, not squander it. That night I reread Grandpa's letter, letting the words sink deeper. Use this key to guard what matters. He hadn't said spend or sell. He'd said guard. It echoed military duty, hold the line, defend the position, don't fold under pressure. The pressure came sooner than expected. 2 days later, as I stepped out of the armory after drill, Vanessa waited by my car. She wore her best coat, the kind she put on when she wanted to look like the responsible sibling. We need to talk, she said, smiling like it was optional. I crossed my arms. Then talk. She lowered her voice. The family is concerned. Grandpa's assets should be divided fairly. Keeping secrets isn't fair. Secrets? I asked. You mean documents filed with the state and renewed yearly? That's not a secret. That's public record. Her smile faltered. You don't have to be sarcastic. We could avoid lawyers if you just shared. I unlocked my car door. Funny. When the will was read, you laughed. Now you want to negotiate. Her hand touched the door. This isn't about me. It's about everyone. I slid behind the wheel. No, Vanessa. It's about what he trusted me with. And trust isn't up for negotiation. I drove off before she could stage another speech. In the rearview mirror, she stood in the lot, coat flapping in the wind, face tightening into the mask she wore when she didn't get her way. At home, I laid the key on the table again, next to the notebook and the deed. The weight of it wasn't just brass anymore. It was pressure, expectation, and proof. The laughter at the reading of the will had turned into arguments in kitchens and parking lots, and I knew the noise would only get louder. But sitting there, with Grandpa's handwriting under my lamp and the brass key cool against my palm, I also knew the noise couldn't change what was already mine to guard. The next Saturday, Vanessa hosted one of her family brunches, which was code for her chance to perform control in front of cousins, neighbors, and anyone else who'd applaud her baked quiche. I walked in wearing my army jacket because it was practical, not for effect, though her raised eyebrow said otherwise. She had staged the living room like a courtroom. Dylan leaned against the fireplace, beer already in hand despite it being late morning. Aunt Margaret sat primly on the couch, and 2 of Vanessa's friends filled the side chairs, invited as witnesses more than guests. Evelyn, Vanessa began in her hostess-turned-prosecutor voice, we've been discussing the estate, and we feel it's only right to address the confusion you're causing. I sat in the chair opposite her, crossing my arms. Confusion? Or discomfort because I'm not handing you papers to decorate with? Her smile was sugar with arsenic. It's not about me. It's about unity. Grandpa valued family above all, and by keeping these documents to yourself, you're dividing us. I let the silence stretch. Military silence unnerves civilians. Finally, Dylan broke it. Come on, Major. Just tell us what's in the box. You don't even care about money. That's correct, I said evenly. I care about accuracy. Grandpa documented assets carefully. I'm making sure they're protected. Vanessa's eyes sharpened. Protected from whom? I leaned forward. From people who laugh before the will is finished. The jab landed. She flushed, adjusted her necklace, and shifted gears. You realize people in town are already whispering? They think you're hiding something big? You might wear a uniform, but that won't protect you from gossip. Her friends nodded like trained backup singers. Aunt Margaret sipped her tea, pretending not to enjoy the show. I stood, tugged my jacket straight. You want gossip? Fine, keep talking. I'll stick to what's real. Grandpa trusted me for a reason. Walking out, I heard Dylan mutter, "Guess the army teaches dramatics, too." Vanessa hushed him, probably realizing I'd left the door open just enough to hear. Outside, the sun was bright, the kind that exposes every crack in sidewalks and people alike. I drove to the Walnut Street house, needing air that wasn't poisoned by performance. Neighbors waved from porches, their faces curious. They'd heard Vanessa's version, no doubt. In small towns, stories spread faster than newsprint. The study smelled faintly of dust and furniture polish. I sat at Grandpa's desk, running my hand across the grain, imagining the years of ledgers he filled here. The key rested heavy in my pocket, but heavier was the realization that my family's scorn wasn't stopping. It was multiplying. That evening, at the grocery store, I caught two women glancing from the freezer aisle, whispering into each other's hair. One of them finally spoke. "Evelyn, we heard you came into quite a fortune. Must be nice." I smiled, the kind of smile we train with, firm, unreadable. Nice is relative. Groceries still cost the same. At checkout, the cashier hesitated before bagging my items, as if holding back a question. The rumors were working, thanks to Vanessa's careful planting. Back at my apartment, I laid out Grandpa's notebook again, rereading his exacting notes. Every entry was proof he thought ahead. He must have known this would happen, family turning whispers into weapons. But instead of warning me, he'd armed me with something stronger, records that couldn't be twisted by opinion. 2 days later, during unit drills, Harris approached me again. "Ma'am, heard something weird at the diner. People saying you're sitting on some hidden vault." I raised an eyebrow. "And you believe diner gossip now?" He laughed. "No, ma'am, but they sure do. Folks like stories more than facts." His words stuck with me. Vanessa understood that better than anyone. She didn't need the truth, she just needed a version that played well to the crowd. By midweek, Aunt Margaret called me. "Vanessa is talking about contesting the will formally," she said, her voice pitched low like we were conspirators. "She says Grandpa must have been confused when he gave you the key." I almost laughed. Confused? He documented land parcels down to the square foot. He wasn't confused. End quote. "She's convincing people otherwise," Margaret said. "Be careful." After the call, I stood at my window, looking at the street below. A couple walked a dog. Kids rode bikes. Life kept moving, while mine was being painted into a villain's portrait. Vanessa wanted me cast as the soldier who stole the family fortune, the ungrateful granddaughter hoarding secrets. I knew I couldn't fight gossip with denial. The only counter to performance was proof, delivered at the right moment, without theatrics. Grandpa's records would speak louder than her smirks. That night, I pulled the deed from its folder, tracing the lines of his signature. It wasn't just ink, it was his voice, steady and sure. He hadn't given me a stage prop. He'd given me a command: guard what matters. And as much as Vanessa tightened her grip on public opinion, I tightened mine on the truth, knowing which would outlast the other. The brass key dug into my leg through my pocket as I sat across from Brooks in his glass-walled office. He slid the logbook across for my signature, his face unreadable. "You've been accessing the box often," he said mildly. "I'm entitled to," I replied, pen scratching my name with the kind of finality drilled into me by years of paperwork. "Of course," he said, standing to escort me back to the vault. His shoes echoed against the marble, a rhythm that made me think of parade grounds. Compartment 14 opened with the same clean click, like it knew me now. This time, I pulled out everything, every sealed envelope, every certificate, every folded deed, and stacked them neatly on the cart. There was a sealed packet at the back I hadn't noticed before, thicker than the rest, bound with twine. Back in the private room, I cut the twine and opened the packet. Inside was a collection of letters, each one addressed to different names. Men I recognized from old stories Grandpa told about the war. Some had military addresses, others civilian. He'd kept correspondence, contracts, and even promissory notes that spanned decades. At the bottom lay a smaller leather folder embossed with his initials. Inside, I found a handwritten message titled, "To the Key Holder." The words pulled me down into the chair. "If you are here, it means you carry the weight of what the rest cannot. Money and land will tempt them, but what matters is not what shines, it's what lasts. The man or woman who holds this key must choose dignity over display. I trust you because you serve something greater than yourself. Guard this legacy with the same honor you give your uniform. Grandpa." I sat still, the folder heavy in my lap. His words weren't sentimental, They were orders. Orders written in ink, carved with the same certainty he'd carried into battle and later into family gatherings where no one recognized the discipline underneath. Later, back at my apartment, I spread the documents across the table like a field map. Bonds neatly tied, deeds labeled by parcel, letters stacked in order. The notebook sat at the center like a compass. His instructions weren't about inheritance, they were about stewardship. The hum of the fridge was the only sound as I read, line after line. Land that stretched into the county line. Bonds that matured steadily across decades. Contracts signed with witnesses long gone. Each page was boring in its precision, and that was the point. Stability isn't glamorous, it's steady. The knock on my door startled me. Dylan stood outside holding a six-pack, his grin sheepish. "Don't shoot, Major," he said. I let him in, watching his eyes dart to the papers spread across my table. He whistled. No wonder Vanessa's losing sleep. "Keep your voice down," I said, shutting the door. He cracked a beer, leaning against my counter. "Look, I don't care about paperwork, but Vanessa's turning the whole family into a circus. She's telling anyone who listens that you're hiding a fortune. She even told old Mrs. Carver that you've got gold bars under your bed." "Gold bars?" I laughed, shaking my head. "She's good at stories," he said, sipping his beer. "Always was." I studied him. "Why are you here, Dylan? To spy?" He held up his hands. "Nope. To warn you. She's planning something bigger than brunch speeches. Talking to a lawyer. Says Grandpa must have been manipulated when he gave you the key." That hit harder than I wanted to admit. To call Grandpa's clarity manipulation was an insult not just to him, but to me. Dylan finished his beer and left, leaving the smell of hops behind. I stood over the table, Grandpa's folder open, the words echoing, "Guard this legacy with the same honor you give your uniform." The next day, I took the notebook and letters to Sergeant Allen again. He leafed through them, nodding slowly. "Your grandfather was sharper than anyone gave him credit for. These aren't just records, they're proof of intent. Anyone claiming confusion is going to hit a wall here." "Vanessa's banking on theater," I said. "Then don't play her game," he replied. "Play your own. Quiet, precise, effective." His advice mirrored Grandpa's pre-6, and as I drove back, I thought of Vanessa rehearsing lines in front of her mirror, practicing indignation, perfecting her victim face. She'd underestimated me the same way she underestimated the army that behind the uniform was a woman trained to hold ground, absorb pressure, and not blink first. That evening I sat by the window, the key warm in my hand. Streetlights flickered on, one by one, across the block. Inside, the notebook and folder waited, steady as ever. Outside, the town buzzed with gossip and theater. I leaned back, letting the weight of Grandpa's words settle deeper. This wasn't just a fight over property. It was a fight over legacy, discipline, and the difference between what sparkles and what lasts. The morning air carried that sharp chill that always reminded me of early formations. I had a folder under my arm packed with copies of Grandpa's letters. There was one more lead in them, an old address scribbled on the back of an envelope, belonging to a man named Howard Lewis. I remembered the name faintly from Grandpa's stories. Howard could fix anything, with 2 hands and stubbornness. The address led me to a single-story house on the edge of town, the kind with a flagpole in the yard and tools stacked neatly in the carport. When I knocked, the door opened slowly, and an older man stood framed in the doorway. His eyes were sharp, despite the years. "Howard Levis?" I asked. "That depends on who's asking," he said. "I'm Evelyn Grant, Samuel Grant's granddaughter." His posture shifted instantly. "Sam's girl. Well, hell. Come on in." The living room smelled faintly of machine oil and strong coffee. Plaques lined the walls, medals, photos of young men in uniform, grainy snapshots of jungle terrain. Howard motioned me to the couch and brought 2 mugs from the kitchen. "Your grandfather and I served 2 tours together," he said, settling into his chair. "He saved my hide more times than I can count. What brings you here?" I slid the folder across. "I found letters he kept, some of them from you. He left me the key to his safety box. Now my family's trying to tear it apart. I need to understand what he was protecting." Howard opened the folder, adjusting his glasses. He scanned the pages slowly, nodding here and there. When he came to Grandpa's handwritten message, his lips tightened. He He always said he'd leave the heavy lifting to someone who understood duty. Looks like that's you. I asked carefully, what kind of heavy lifting are we talking about? Howard leaned back, staring at the ceiling for a moment before answering. After the war, a lot of guys came home lost. Sam wasn't one of them. He built steadiness where others drowned, bought land, invested carefully. But he also made a promise that what he built would never be wasted on people who didn't respect sacrifice. He'd seen too many squander what others died for. The words landed heavier than the coffee mug in my hand. Howard continued, his voice steady. That trust, that land, those bonds, those weren't just investments. They were safeguards. He meant them to outlast noise, outlast greed. He told me once, if my family doesn't understand it, one will. One will get the key. Looks like he chose right. I swallowed hard, the weight of it pressing on me in a way Vanessa's accusations never could. He knew the others wouldn't accept it. Of course he did, Howard said. But he didn't choose them. He chose you, and Sam didn't gamble with trust. I left Howard's house with the folder tighter in my hands, his words ringing louder than gossip. The road back felt shorter, though my mind churned longer. Grandpa hadn't left me money to enjoy. He'd left me responsibility to shoulder. When I pulled into my apartment lot, Vanessa's car was already parked outside. She stood leaning against the hood, arms folded, smile too rehearsed. You've been busy, she said. Move your car, I replied flatly. Not until we talk. I unlocked my door, leaving it open behind me. She followed in like a cat that thinks it owns the place. Her eyes went straight to the folder in my hands. Where were you? She asked. Not your concern. Everything's my concern when you're hiding family assets. I set the folder on the counter, deliberately slow. You want to know what I found? Letters. From men who actually mattered. From the war you never asked Grandpa about. From the life you never cared to understand. She scoffed. Don't lecture me with your army drama. This is about fairness. I turned, the fatigue of her voice heavier than drills. Fairness? You laughed when he handed me the key. You mocked what you didn't understand. And now that it's worth something, you want a piece. That's not fairness. That's theater. Her face tightened, but she masked it quickly. Lawyers won't care about your speeches. They'll care about signatures and dates. And trust me, I've already made calls. She walked out with her head high, but her eyes gave her away nervous, calculating. That night, I opened the window to let the cool air cut through the tension. The key sat on the table, the folder beside it, steady and silent. For the first time, I didn't just see metal and paper. I saw command. Grandpa had passed me a mission, and Howard had confirmed it. I didn't need Vanessa's approval, or Dylan's casual warnings, or the whispers at the grocery store. I had something stronger: proof, purpose, and the knowledge that Grandpa hadn't chosen wrong. The brass key gleamed faintly under the lamplight, waiting for the next lock it was meant to open. 2 mornings after my talk with Howard, I stopped by the diner on Main Street to grab coffee before drill. The second I stepped through the door, I felt it, the shift in silence, the glances that cut quick and then lingered. People who had once nodded politely now leaned close to each other, whispering. When I slid into a booth, the waitress, Bonnie, avoided eye contact. She poured the coffee too fast, spilling a little on the table, muttering, "Sorry," before rushing off. At the counter, a group of old-timers murmured, loud enough for me to hear, "Doesn't take a key to rob your own family." Vanessa had worked faster than I thought. She didn't just talk at brunch. She'd spun her story into the town's bloodstream. By noon, I found out how. My phone buzzed with a message from Sergeant Allen. Check the Gazette. I pulled up the town paper's site. There it was, splashed under Community Affairs. Local soldier accused of hiding family fortune. The article was practically written by Vanessa. Quotes from sources close to the family painted me as secretive, self-serving, someone using military rank as a shield to keep assets away from rightful heirs. A smiling photo of Vanessa, arms folded, eyes tilted, just so sat beside the text. She was cast as the concerned granddaughter trying to honor Grandpa's true intentions. Undo. The comments section was poison. People who once waved at me on the street now wrote about greed, betrayal, how uniforms don't make saints. I shut my phone off and clenched the steering wheel. Gossip at brunch was one thing. Headlines were another. She'd declared open war, and she wasn't fighting fair. That evening, I stopped at the grocery store. This time, whispers weren't hidden. A man I barely knew muttered, "Disgrace," as I passed. A woman in the cereal aisle shook her head and said loudly to no one in particular, "Her grandfather must be rolling in his grave." I kept my face neutral, years of training keeping me from snapping back. Inside, though, the heat rose. Vanessa wasn't satisfied with family humiliation. She wanted me shamed out of town. Back at my apartment, I sat at the table, the brass key between my fingers, steady and unyielding. That was when the knock came. Dylan again. But this time, no beer, no smirk, just tension. "She's gone too far," he said when I opened the door. I didn't argue. She called the paper, fed them half-truths and pure lies, told them you were exploiting Grandpa's age, told them you're hiding bonds and property. She wants you cornered. I leaned against the doorway. "And you? You just watched?" He winced. "What do you want me to do? She's my sister too. She's your ringleader." I shot back. He didn't deny it. He just looked down, scuffing his shoe against the concrete. "Listen, whatever you're sitting on, it better be bulletproof, because she's not stopping until it's hers." When he left, I turned back to the table. The documents were already spread out: deeds, bonds, Grandpa's letter. Bulletproof wasn't the issue. The truth was solid. The problem was optics. Vanessa thrived on performance, on the way things looked, and right now, she'd painted me as the villain. I spent the night scanning every page, organizing files like evidence. The army had taught me discipline. Grandpa had taught me patience. Vanessa hadn't learned either. The next morning, during a run through town, 2 teenagers yelled from across the street, "Hey, key thief!" They laughed, not even waiting for a reaction. Their parents, standing nearby, didn't stop them. That stung worse than the shout itself. By afternoon, flyers appeared on bulletin boards outside the library and grocery store. Grainy photos of Grandpa with Vanessa, cropped to make it look like he was handing her something, sat above bold print. "Fairness for the Grant family." No one signed them, but her hand was all over it. I ripped one down, folded it carefully, and tucked it into my pocket. Evidence, not rage. That night, I drove back out to Howard's place. He opened the door before I even knocked, as if he'd been expecting me. "She's making it ugly," he said, gesturing me inside. "Ugly doesn't bother me," I replied. "But lies do." Howard sat, clasping his hands together. "Sam knew this could happen. That's why he wrote those letters. That's why he chose you. You've got proof. She's got noise. Let her make all the noise she wants. Truth doesn't rattle as easy." His calm steadied me. For decades, he'd carried his own scars, his own battles. He wasn't moved by gossip. And neither should I be. Driving home under the dark sky, I repeated Grandpa's words like cadence. Guard what matters. Gossip didn't matter. Newspaper lies didn't matter. What mattered was the legacy in my care. The brass key sat warm in my pocket again, unshaken by paper headlines or whispers. And as the town turned against me, I felt the weight of it more clearly than ever. Not as a burden, but as proof I was exactly where Grandpa had intended me to be. The courthouse smelled like dust and cold coffee. Its beige walls hadn't been painted in years, and the fluorescent lights buzzed overhead with that faint, irritating hum. I sat at the defendant's table in a stiff wooden chair, the brass key heavy in my pocket like contraband. Across the aisle, Vanessa perched beside her attorney in a pristine cream blazer, her posture perfect, her expression one of rehearsed sorrow. If the jury box had been filled, she would have looked straight at them with those wide, innocent eyes. The judge entered, robes swaying, and we all rose. My lawyer, a steady man named Harrington, whispered, "Don't react. Let her bury herself." The gavel cracked, and the proceedings began. Vanessa's attorney opened with theatrics, his voice rising and falling like a stage actor. "Ladies and gentlemen, this is not about greed, it's about deception. It's about a granddaughter who took advantage of her grandfather's failing health, who clung to a key not meant for her, and who now hides family property behind secrecy." He gestured broadly toward me, then toward Vanessa, who dabbed at imaginary tears. "My client only seeks fairness." I kept my face calm, but my hand curled against my thigh. Harrington had told me this would come, that they would paint me as a manipulator, a soldier using rank to bully family, and there it was, spelled out in headlines for a courtroom instead of a newspaper. When it was Harrington's turn, He stood without drama, smoothing his tie. The late Samuel Grant served his country with honor, and he lived his life with equal honor. He left a key not to his eldest, not to his loudest, but to the one person he trusted. That trust wasn't casual, it was deliberate. We will show evidence of his clarity, his planning, and his choice. This is not about manipulation. This is about respect for his wishes. He sat down, no fireworks, no theater, just calm authority. Witnesses came and went. Vanessa had lined up friends and distant cousins to say how Grandpa seemed confused in his last months, how he always promised to take care of everyone equally. Each statement was thin, based on hearsay, but strung together they built a fog of suspicion. I recognized the strategy. It wasn't about proof, it was about planting doubt. At one point, Vanessa herself took the stand. She clasped her hands, tilted her head just so, and let her voice waver. I loved Grandpa dearly. All I ever wanted was to see his wishes honored. But Evelyn, she shut us out. She locked us away from the truth. Doesn't family matter? Doesn't fairness matter? She paused, letting her words hang in the air. Her attorney looked at the judge as if to say, "See? How could anyone doubt this angel?" My jaw tightened, but I didn't move. Harrington had warned me, "Do not let her bait you." When it was our turn, Harrington called the bank manager, Brooks, who confirmed in precise detail how Grandpa had come in alone, clear-minded, insisting that the key belonged to me. He described Grandpa's signature as strong, consistent, not shaky. He spoke of his demeanor as firm, deliberate. Then came the documents, deeds, bonds, letters, all cataloged and verified. The courtroom grew quieter with each page shown. And finally, Harrington laid out the handwritten message, "To the key holder." The judge leaned forward, reading it carefully. Vanessa shifted in her chair, her polished smile faltering for a moment. Still, her attorney tried to poke holes. Handwriting can be forged, memories can be selective. Isn't it possible he was influenced? Isn't it possible the so-called key holder pressured him? Brooks didn't flinch. Samuel Grant was sharper than half the young clients I see. He knew what he was doing. The tension in the room rose, but Harrington stayed steady. He called no more witnesses, closing his folder deliberately. His final words, "This case is not about fairness defined by who shouts the loudest. It is about honoring the intent of a man who served his country, built a legacy, and chose a guardian. That guardian sits here today, fulfilling that trust." The judge announced a recess. I stepped out into the hallway, where the buzz of spectators mixed with the stale air. Some people avoided my eyes. Others stared openly, measuring me like I was on parade. By the vending machines, Dylan stood awkwardly, hands shoved in his pockets. "She's got them eating out of her hand," he muttered. "She's got noise," I said. "I've got truth." He looked at me, uncertain, then nodded. "Don't let her win." I didn't answer. Winning wasn't the goal. Holding ground was. Grandpa hadn't trusted me to perform. He'd trusted me to protect. When the recess ended, we filed back in. Vanessa avoided looking at me, but her fingers twisted her necklace in small, nervous circles. For all her poise, the cracks were showing. The judge resumed, his voice steady, and called for closing arguments. The battle lines were drawn, and every eye in the room was locked on the fight. The courtroom doors swung open the next morning with a sharper crack than usual, and Howard walked in with the kind of gait that said he hadn't forgotten how to march. He wore a pressed shirt, medals pinned neatly on his chest, and carried a binder thick enough to break the table it landed on. Heads turned as he passed. Even Vanessa blinked hard when she saw him, though she quickly smoothed her expression into polite disdain. Harrington gave me a slight nod. "This is the anchor." When Howard took the stand, his voice carried more weight than the gavel. "Name's Howard Lewis. Served 2 tours with Samuel Grant. I've known him better than most men know their own brothers." He wasn't confused, and he sure as hell wasn't tricked by anyone. He made his choices with both eyes wide open. Vanessa's attorney tried to cut in. "Mr. Lewis, isn't it true that memory fades over time? You're talking about events decades past. How can we trust?" Howard cut him off with a look that could freeze water. "You weren't there in the jungle, son. I was. I saw Sam pull men out under fire. I saw him write letters by flashlight because promises mattered to him. I watched him build his future, 1 acre, one bond, one decision at a time. He didn't gamble, and he didn't leave things to chance. That key was his choice. End of story. A murmur rippled through the room. For once, the spectators weren't hanging on Vanessa's every word. They were locked on Howard. Then came the binder. Inside were old photographs, letters signed in Sam's hand, notarized records Howard had kept out of loyalty, copies of conversations where Sam wrote about wanting someone with backbone, not vanity, to carry on his work. Harrington spread them out on the evidence table like cards in a winning hand. I sat straighter, the knot in my stomach loosening as the judge leaned forward, studying each page. Vanessa shifted again, her perfect composure cracking in small tremors. Her lawyer tried one last swing. Mr. Lewis, isn't it possible your loyalty clouds your judgment? That you simply want to believe? Howard's laugh was short and sharp. Son, loyalty doesn't cloud judgment. It clarifies it. And I'll tell you this, Sam trusted Evelyn because she serves, because she shoulders weight without complaint. He didn't leave that key to a loud mouth or a gossip. He left it to a soldier. The word soldier hit the room like a strike. Even the bailiff straightened a little. When Howard stepped down, he passed me and gripped my shoulder firmly. It wasn't for show. It was the kind of grip you'd expect from someone who'd dragged you out of mud and expected you to do the same someday. The judge called for a short recess. Outside, the courthouse steps buzzed with reporters. Cameras flashed, microphones pushed forward. Questions flew. Did you manipulate your grandfather? What do you say about the accusations? How do you respond to Mr. Lewis's testimony? I didn't answer. Years in uniform had taught me that silence often speaks louder than anything rehearsed. I walked down the steps steady, the brass key pressing into my pocket with every stride. Behind me, Howard followed like a wall of steel, and the crowd parted without meaning to. Back inside, Harrington leaned over and whispered, "That turned the tide. But stay sharp. She'll play her last cards harder than ever." The afternoon session began with Vanessa's attorney scrambling to patch holes. He brought up accountants, distant relatives, anyone willing to say Grandpa, talked about sharing equally. But against the documents, against Howard's presence, their words floated like smoke without a fire. When Vanessa was recalled, her tone had lost its soft sorrow. It was sharper, edged with panic. My grandfather loved me. He always promised I'd be taken care of. I don't understand how anyone can think he'd shut me out. Her attorney asked, "Do you believe Evelyn manipulated him?" "Yes," she said quickly, her eyes darting toward me. "She used her position, her uniform, to intimidate him." The judge raised a brow. "Is there evidence of that?" Her silence stretched too long. He changed after she came back from deployment. He was different." "Different how?" the judge pressed. She stumbled, words thin. He wasn't himself. It was weak, and everyone knew it. Harrington didn't even bother to object. He let the weakness stand, visible to all. By late afternoon, the energy in the courtroom had shifted entirely. The spectators weren't whispering about the key thief anymore. They leaned forward when Howard spoke, frowned when Vanessa faltered. The balance wasn't just legal, it was human. Truth had weight, and the room felt it. When the judge finally called for adjournment that day, the gavel echoed different than before, not like a hammer, but like a scale finding its balance. Outside, as the sun dipped low, Howard and I stood on the courthouse steps. He lit a cigarette, exhaled slow, and said, "Sam was right. You've got more steel in you than most. Don't waste it worrying about whispers." I looked out at the small crowd still gathered across the street, holding flyers Vanessa had passed around. Their faces weren't jeering now. They were watching, waiting, recalculating. I slid my hand into my pocket, fingers curling around the key again. The metal was warm from my palm, steady against the noise, against the doubts, against Vanessa's last gasps for control. And for the first time since the funeral, I felt the weight settle not as a burden, but as armor. The next morning, the benches in the courtroom filled earlier than usual. Word had spread fast about Howard's testimony, and the crowd looked different now, more curious than judgmental, leaning forward with that hunger people have when they sense something real is about to break open. Vanessa sat rigid at her table, jaw tight, blazer pressed even sharper than before, as if fabric alone could hold her together. Her attorney shuffled papers with nervous energy. Across from them, Harrington laid out the binder and documents in a neat line, calm as ever. The judge called the session to order, and Harrington rose, buttoning his jacket. His voice was measured, no theatrics, no shouting, just deliberate steps down a straight path. Your Honor, what we have here is not a matter of confusion or manipulation. It is a matter of record. Samuel Grant, veteran landowner, father and grandfather, left behind clarity, not chaos. My client was not chosen by accident or by trickery. She was chosen because she embodies the very principles Mr. Grant lived by. Ow. He held up the letter Grandpa had written, its ink steady even in age. This is his handwriting. This is his intent. He chose a key because a key represents trust, and he chose Major Evelyn Grant because she earned it. The judge gestured for him to proceed. Harrington called Brooks, the banker, back to confirm the letter's authenticity. Then, one by one, the documents were read aloud. Deeds, accounts, investments, all signed clearly, all pointing to the same conclusion. As each page was laid out, Vanessa's face paled further. She tapped her pen against the table in rapid bursts, a nervous tic she couldn't mask anymore. Her attorney tried half-hearted objections, but they fell flat. The judge overruled them with curt efficiency. Then came the moment Harrington had held in reserve. He motioned for Howard, who walked back to the stand with his binder. From it, Harrington pulled a letter few had seen before, one addressed directly to me, sealed until now. Your Honor, Harrington said, this letter was found among Mr. Grant's personal effects, notarized and dated. It was intended for Evelyn Grant alone, but with the court's permission, we believe it demonstrates his clarity and intent beyond question. The judge nodded. Harrington opened it carefully, his voice steady as he read aloud. Evelyn, if you're reading this, it means I've gone. I leave you this key not for wealth, but for responsibility. Others will clamor for shares, for fairness, by their definition. But you know, fairness isn't division, it's protection. You've served this country with honor, and I trust you to serve this family's name the same way. Do not bend to noise. Guard what matters. Grandpa. The silence that followed wasn't empty, it was heavy. The kind of silence that filled every corner and pressed down on every whisper. Even the judge leaned back, expression unreadable but eyes sharp, weighing what he'd just heard. Vanessa's attorney shot up. Objection. This letter could have been fabricated, but the judge cut him short. The letter is notarized, dated, and signed. Objection overruled. Vanessa's control slipped. She slammed her pen down and hissed, "This isn't right. He wouldn't just ignore me." The judge turned his gaze on her, stern. "Miss Grant, you will compose yourself." Aye. Her face flushed crimson, but the outburst had already cracked the veneer she'd worked so hard to keep polished. The spectators noticed. A murmur ran through the benches, not of doubt about me anymore, but about her. Harrington, calm as ever, simply closed the binder and said, "Your Honor, the evidence speaks louder than my words ever could. We rest." The judge nodded. "Very well. Closing arguments." Vanessa's attorney stood, trying to claw back ground. He spoke of family bonds, of fairness, of how wealth should never be hoarded by one person. His words had rhythm but no anchor. They drifted, disconnected, as if even he knew the ground was slipping beneath him. When Harrington rose for the final time, he didn't pace. He didn't gesture. He simply looked at the judge and spoke like a man stating fact, not opinion. This case is not about jealousy or perception. It is about honoring a man's deliberate choice. Samuel Grant's record is consistent. His letters are clear. His witness is credible. His trust was placed in one person, and that person has carried herself with dignity in the face of insult and slander. The law does not bend to gossip. It upholds intent, and the intent here is undeniable. He sat down, no fanfare, just certainty. The judge leaned forward, hands clasped, eyes scanning the evidence before him. For a long moment, the only sound was the faint buzz of the lights and the shuffle of papers. No one dared move, not even Vanessa. When he finally spoke, his words cut sharp and clean. "The court recognizes the evidence presented. The will is upheld. The property, investments, and all holdings associated with the key remain under the sole authority of Major Evelyn Grant. A collective exhale rolled through the room like air rushing out of a balloon stretched too tight. Vanessa's face twisted, caught between disbelief and rage, but she stayed seated, her attorney tugging at her sleeve to keep her from exploding again. I sat still, posture straight, letting the words settle. My hand brushed the key in my pocket, not as victory, but as confirmation. The gavel struck, finalizing the decision. The noise in the courtroom rose immediately, reporters scribbling, spectators buzzing, relatives murmuring to each other. But through it all, I kept my focus steady, the way I had on patrols overseas. Eyes forward, noise behind me, mission clear. Howard caught my eye from the back row. He gave a short nod, the kind a soldier gives another when words aren't needed. Harrington packed the binder slowly, methodically, while Vanessa sat frozen, her empire of gossip collapsing around her. The truth wasn't just spoken, it had been carved into record. And nothing she said, no whisper she spread, could erase it now. The courthouse emptied slowly, a stream of bodies buzzing with the weight of what they'd just seen. But Vanessa wasn't finished. She pushed through the crowd, her heels clacking like hammer blows on the marble floor, her attorney trailing behind like a man who knew he'd lost but couldn't stop the train wreck. She turned sharply toward the reporters clustered near the doors. She manipulated him. Vanessa's voice rang out, high and raw, nothing like the carefully staged tones she'd used in the courtroom. Cameras swiveled immediately, microphones lunged closer. She used her uniform to intimidate him, to control him. She's hiding behind the flag because she has nothing else. The words hit like shrapnel in the air. Reporters shouted, flashes popped, and a dozen pens scratched furiously. Harrington stiffened beside me, but I didn't move. Howard stepped closer, a wall at my back. I let Vanessa's words hang there a moment, then walked forward into the circle of cameras, steady as if I were walking onto a parade ground. My voice didn't rise, I didn't need it to. My uniform is not a shield. It's a record. Every stripe, every ribbon, every scar earned. My grandfather didn't give me that key because of my uniform. He gave it to me because he knew I wouldn't trade honor for comfort. That's the difference between us. He trusted me to carry his legacy, not cash it in. That. The crowd surged, reporters yelling questions over each other. Vanessa sputtered, face red, words dissolving into broken accusations. She's lying, she can't. But it was done. The reporters weren't circling me anymore, they were circling her. They smelled blood, and it wasn't mine. One of them shouted, "Vanessa, do you have proof of these claims?" Her eyes darted, her mouth opened, but no words came. Cameras clicked. It was all the answer anyone needed. Howard leaned close enough for only me to hear. "Don't swing at her. She's already knocked herself out." I gave the faintest nod. The next day, the local paper ran with the headline, "Keyholder Vindicated. Family Feud Ends in Courtroom Clash." Below it was a photo of Vanessa mid-outburst, face contorted, captioned with her accusations that fell flat. My own picture sat beside it calm, hands folded, the key visible against the outline of my jacket pocket. But if Vanessa couldn't win in court, she tried to win in the court of public opinion. She called into radio shows, posted online, claimed the whole trial was rigged. She spun stories about me bullying the family and hiding millions. It almost worked online. Comments swelled with strangers parroting her lies. But then something else happened. Veterans groups started posting in response. Howard's unit put out a statement about my grandfather's service, about the kind of man he was, and why his trust mattered. Soldiers I'd served with added their voices, talking about my integrity, about deployments, about sacrifices that didn't fit Vanessa's little narrative of greed. It spread fast. The hashtags weren't about Vanessa's claims anymore. They were about honor, service, and family. People weren't asking, did she manipulate her grandfather? They were asking, why is Vanessa so desperate to strip her family's legacy for herself? One evening, as I left the grocery store, a stranger stopped me in the parking lot. Middle-aged, baseball cap pulled low. He said, "Major Grant?" I nodded. He held out his hand, rough and firm. "My brother served with you in Kandahar. He told me about you. Don't let anyone drag your name through the mud." It wasn't staged. It wasn't politics. It was truth spoken by someone who didn't owe me a thing. That's what started cutting through Vanessa's noise. Still, she didn't quit. She filed an appeal. Thin, desperate, baseless. Harrington handled it with the ease of swatting a fly. The court tossed it out before it even warmed a chair. But her bitterness had no expiration date. She started showing up outside my grandfather's property, staging little protests with a few friends carrying signs about family betrayal. Some neighbors complained, others watched in silence, but I stayed inside. My silence was louder than her shouts. One evening, though, she cornered me as I was locking the front gate. Her eyes were wild, her voice ragged. "You think you've won, Evelyn? You think holding that key makes you better than me?" I turned the key slowly in my hand, the brass catching the last of the sunset. "It doesn't make me better. It makes me responsible. That's something you'll never understand." Howin May. Her mouth twisted, a sound like a growl breaking out, but she had no words left. She stormed off, heels crunching gravel, her protest signs abandoned on the roadside. Inside the house, I sat at Grandpa's old desk. The wood was worn smooth under my palms, the drawers filled with ledgers, notes, photographs. This wasn't treasure, it was history. It wasn't gold, it was blood and sweat turned into something lasting. Howard's words echoed in my head. Loyalty doesn't cloud judgment, it clarifies it. That was the core of it. Grandpa hadn't trusted me because of DNA, or because I was loudest, or because I demanded it. He trusted me because I understood the difference between inheritance and stewardship. One takes, the other guards. The reporters eventually moved on. The papers found new scandals. Vanessa's name faded from headlines, drifting down into the corner gossip columns. But the key stayed. Its weight the same, its meaning deeper. I stood in the quiet of that old farmhouse, the land stretching out beyond the windows, and felt the kind of calm you can't fake. The fight hadn't been about money, not really. It had been about whether honor could survive noise, whether trust could stand against jealousy, and it had. Vanessa had thrown her last accusation. I'd given my final stand, and the truth had held. The courthouse buzz had faded, but the echo of the verdict lingered everywhere I went. At the coffee shop downtown, people who once avoided eye contact now nodded at me with cautious respect. Some smiled, others muttered, "Good for you, Major," as they passed. It wasn't applause, but it was acknowledgement, the kind that sticks deeper than noise. Vanessa, meanwhile, disappeared from the main stage. Her tantrum outside the courthouse and her failed appeal left her credibility in ruins. The local news cycle moved on, hungry for fresher scandals, but she still lingered on the edges, trying to claw back relevance. She gave interviews to smaller blogs and podcasts, ranting about conspiracies, about how the court was military biased, how I had manipulated the system. Each time she spoke, fewer people listened. Each time she posted, the comments beneath drowned her out. Howard said it best when we sat on the porch one evening. He sipped his black coffee, cigarette smoke curling up against the night sky. Vanessa's fighting a war she already lost. She just doesn't know when to lay down arms. The world's moving on, and she's stuck yelling at shadows. I knew he was right. Her noise was losing traction, but the weight of the key in my pocket never lightened. Grandpa hadn't handed me a trophy. He'd handed me a burden wrapped in responsibility. That became clearer when I visited the Veterans Center a week later. I'd gone there often during deployments, sometimes for rehab after an injury, sometimes just to see the men and women who wore the same scars I did. This time, I wasn't in uniform. I was just Evelyn, granddaughter with a key that felt heavier every day. One of the coordinators pulled me aside. "We heard about the case. Some of the vets wanted to meet you. Said your grandfather was one of the reasons they stayed on their feet back then." End of 2. I walked into the common room and saw faces lined with age. Some in wheelchairs, some with prosthetics, some just worn by life. They clapped not for the court win but for Grandpa. They told me stories I'd never heard. How he'd kept guys from selling their land too cheap after the war. How he'd covered mortgage payments when someone's benefits got tangled in red tape. How he'd shown up at funerals when no one else did. A woman with a cane looked me straight in the eye. "He picked you because you're like him. Don't waste what he left." Her words followed me home, sharper than any courtroom exchange. That night, I sat at Grandpa's desk with the key on the wood before me. I pulled out his ledgers again, not to check balances but to trace patterns. The man wasn't just holding money, he was building bridges. Land rented to neighbors at half cost, donations to schools under anonymous names, checks to families nobody ever knew about. It wasn't inheritance. It was a blueprint. The next morning, I called Harrington. I need to set up a foundation. Something in his name, something that takes this weight and turns it forward. He didn't sound surprised. I thought you'd say that eventually. What's the focus? Veterans, education, families left behind. Whatever kept him up at night, I wanted to keep this alive. It took weeks of paperwork, meetings, forms stacked so high they felt taller than the courthouse steps. But with every signature, the noise from Vanessa shrank smaller. She filed another half-baked complaint online, but it barely made a ripple. By the time the Samuel Grant Veterans Foundation was officially launched, she was a footnote. At the ribbon cutting, Howard stood beside me, medals catching the sun. The local mayor gave a speech. Harrington said a few words. But the moment that mattered was when I unlocked the front door with the same brass key Grandpa had given me. Cameras flashed, but for once, they didn't feel intrusive. They felt like witnesses to something that deserved to be remembered. Inside, the walls carried framed photographs of Grandpa young, in uniform, then older, always steady. A plaque near the entrance carried his words from that letter. Do not bend to noise, guard what matters. As people toured the center, I stood by the door, shaking hands, listening to stories, catching fragments of thanks that weren't really for me. They were for him. I was just the one holding the lock open. Later that evening, as the crowd dwindled and the reporters packed up, Howard leaned against the wall with his usual quiet smirk. You did it right, kid. He'd be proud. I shook my head. This isn't about pride. It's about keeping his word alive. Howard flicked his cigarette ash. Same thing, in the end. I walked outside, the sunset painting the horizon in streaks of gold. The farmland stretched out, quiet and unbothered, the same soil Grandpa had walked decades ago. I breathed in, the air heavy with the smell of earth and cut grass, and for the first time since the funeral, I felt the key's weight as something steady. Not crushing, not demanding, just steady. Vanessa's voice had faded, her protests reduced to background noise even her friends grew tired of. She hadn't been silenced by force, she'd been silenced by truth, by a legacy she couldn't touch. The victory wasn't mine. It wasn't even Grandpa's. It was Honor's. The kind of victory that doesn't make headlines forever but lasts where it matters. And as I locked the door to the foundation that night, the brass key clicked into place with a sound so final, so right, it echoed like a promise made and kept. The foundation didn't take long to grow legs of its own. Within weeks, donations began arriving from veterans groups, local businesses, even a few anonymous envelopes stuffed with cash and handwritten notes. The staff we assembled worked with the kind of fire you don't get from paychecks alone. They weren't there for a job, they were there because the mission meant something. The first initiative launched was a scholarship program for children of fallen soldiers. At the ceremony, when we announced the names of the first recipients, one of the kids, a boy barely 16, stood stiff like he was trying to look older. He shook my hand with all the force he could muster and whispered, My dad always said people forget too fast. Thank you for not forgetting. His words hit harder than any courtroom verdict ever had. I drove home that night past rows of farmland stretching into the dark, the headlights catching fences Grandpa had mended with his own hands. It was strange, every post, every corner of land looked less like property and more like a reminder. He hadn't left me wealth to guard, he'd left me lives to touch. Vanessa never showed up at any of these events. Her silence was almost louder than her old noise. A few bitter posts online, a snide comment here and there, but the town had moved on. People who once nodded to her in church now crossed the street. Her own bitterness had become her exile. Meanwhile, I began spending more time at the foundation, less at the farmhouse. But I never left the farmhouse empty. Every week I walked through the halls, checking the rooms, dusting the frames, keeping the land alive. One evening, as I was locking the barn, a young soldier approached. He had the stiff walk of someone still healing. You Major Grant? He asked. I nodded. My unit heard about the foundation. My buddy, he didn't make it back. His wife's been drowning in bills. She didn't want charity, but she might listen if it comes through you. I told him to give me her name. A week later, she walked into the foundation office, shoulders hunched, eyes tired. We set her up with support, groceries, childcare, job placement. Watching her leave with her head held just a little higher was like watching a storm break into sunlight. That was when I knew this wasn't a side project. This was the work. Howard came by often, though he never stayed long. He'd sit in the back during meetings, listening, occasionally throwing in one of his dry comments that cut through the noise like a blade. One afternoon, he brought me an old photograph Grandpa standing with his unit, mud on their boots, grins on their faces despite the weight of rifles slung across their shoulders. He was the same then as he was later, Howard said, tapping the glass. Didn't care about who had the loudest mouth, cared about who showed up when it mattered. Guess that's what he saw in you. I kept that photo on my desk at the foundation. Every time I felt tired, every time the paperwork stacked higher than the mission, I'd look at it and remember the simple truth. Showing up when it matters is all that counts. The community began to shift, too. The farmhouse wasn't just my place anymore. It became a landmark, a story people told. That's where Samuel Grant lived. His granddaughter runs the foundation now. It wasn't bragging, it wasn't folklore. It was recognition that legacies can breathe if you keep them fed. One fall morning, I hosted an open house at the farmhouse for the foundation's donors and volunteers. We walked the land, shared food under the trees, and told stories not just of Grandpa, but of the families being helped. A veteran's daughter read a poem about her father. A widow spoke about finding her footing again. By the end, there wasn't a dry eye in the yard, not even Howard's, though he blamed the wind for it. As dusk fell and people drifted off, I stayed behind, watching the lights fade across the fields. For the first time, I understood that the key wasn't a symbol of ownership at all. It was a transfer of duty. Grandpa hadn't chosen me to hoard what he built, he'd chosen me to keep it moving forward. The weight of that realization didn't feel crushing anymore. It felt like armor, something you wear, because it protects more than just you. Vanessa's name eventually vanished altogether from public talk. She hadn't died, she hadn't left town, but she'd been swallowed by her own irrelevance. People don't remember the loudest voices, they remember the ones that stand when it counts. Years later, when the foundation had expanded to 3 states and the scholarships had doubled, a journalist asked me during an interview if I felt vindicated after all the family conflict. I thought about Vanessa, about the courtroom, about the venom she'd spit in front of cameras. Then I thought about the boy who shook my hand, the widow who walked taller, the photo of Grandpa and his unit. Vindication isn't the word, I told him. Honor is. That's what survived all of this. That's what matters. He wrote it down, but I didn't care if it made the article. I hadn't said it for print. I'd said it because it was true. At night, I still keep the key on the desk by my bed. Its edges are worn, the brass dulled, but its meaning has never faded. It doesn't unlock just a box or a house, it unlocks a legacy that can't be shut away. Sometimes, when the house is quiet, I hear Grandpa's voice in my head, steady as ever, guard what matters. And I know I am. The farmhouse is quiet again tonight. The crickets outside louder than any courtroom or headline ever was. I sit at Grandpa's desk, the same one where he signed checks for neighbors, where he scribbled notes in margins that only made sense to him, where he tucked away the ledgers I once thought were just numbers. The key rests beside me, warm from the touch of my hand. The same key that started a war inside my family but ended up unlocking something far greater. I used to think revenge meant tearing someone down, proving them wrong, making them eat their own words. But standing here now, I realize revenge isn't about destruction, it's about survival. It's about proving that noise can't erase honor, that greed can't suffocate legacy. Vanessa screamed, lied, clawed, and threw everything she had at me, but in the end, her fight wasn't with me. It was with herself. And no courtroom, no headline, no speech could save her from that. My fight, though it was never really against her, it was for Grandpa, for the life he built, for the soldiers who wore the same boots I did, for the families who carry invisible burdens every day. Every battle I fought in the courtroom, or in the service, or in my own head, came down to one thing: holding the line. That line doesn't end here. It stretches forward, through the foundation, through the scholarships, through every handshake with a veteran who thought the world had forgotten them. It stretches through the soil of the farmhouse, through the laughter of kids who get a chance they never thought possible, through the stories told long after I'm gone. The truth is, the key was never the prize, it was the reminder. A small piece of brass heavy enough to teach me that what we inherit isn't money or property, it's the responsibility to stand when it matters most. And as long as I carry that, Grandpa's voice will never fade. I close my hand around the key one last time tonight and slide it back into my pocket. Outside, the land lies still under the moonlight. Patient, waiting, alive. This isn't an ending, it never was. It's the kind of story that keeps breathing. Because honor doesn't die with a verdict or a grave. Honor lives as long as someone chooses to guard it. And I will. Always.